This is a brief Monday night update on this August 22nd on newly formed Tropical Storm Sandy located to the south of Jamaica. Maximum sustained winds are 40 miles per hour. The current movement is nearly stationary, however the storm is forecast to begin moving more toward the north within the next 24 to 36 hours. And as you can see here, tropical storm watches are in effect for all of the island of Jamaica and all of Haiti. The Hurricane Center is keeping the intensity at tropical storm status for the next 3 to 5 days. However, I would say it's fairly likely for the Hurricane Center to bump up their intensity forecast to a hurricane either just prior to the storm being shown moving into Cuba or quickly thereafter once it starts to move into the southern Bahamas. The forecast over the next 3 to 5 days is high confidence, and this graphic shows the probability of experiencing tropical storm force winds, and the probabilities across this region are only going to increase due to the high degree of confidence. The track is going to move almost directly over Jamaica and eventually on into eastern Cuba and the Bahamas. The latest run from the tropical models show a lot of agreement with this idea of a track over eastern Cuba and eventually into the southwest Atlantic. And the latest 12Z run of the GFS ensemble members are also in nearly full agreement within the first 3 to 5 days. And thereafter we see that pretty much all of the GFS members are indicating more of a northeast turn out to sea and away from the U.S. eastern seaboard. And I would have to say that this is probably the more likely solution. However, beyond days 4 and 5, we still have several models that are still advertising at least somewhat of a threat to the East Coast. If it were to take that East Coast solution, then it would be a very significant event, but there are still several things that must occur first and foremost in order for that track to occur. The Hurricane Center intensity forecast of 70 miles per hour before the eastern Cuba landfall is a little more aggressive than the intensity model consensus. We've got many models showing nothing more than a moderate tropical storm until the storm exits the Caribbean, and thereafter they show more in the way of strengthening by the time the storm enters the central Bahamas. This is somewhat in disagreement with the Hurricane Center forecast, as they are starting to show a little bit more in the way of weakening by the time the storm enters the Bahamas. But as always, once you get into days 4 and 5, the intensity forecast becomes highly uncertain, and the forecast is even more uncertain with regard to this system because we have potential effects coming in from a trough approaching from the eastern United States. The zoomed-in visible satellite this evening shows that the storm is nearly stationary but also continuing to organize. We've got convection finally starting to consolidate near that surface circulation, and earlier this afternoon the hurricane hunters found that the storm did in fact have a closed center with tropical storm force winds, especially in the southern semicircle where the convection has been most prominent. The zoomed-in water vapor imagery also shows a favorable upper-level environment with a lot of outflow in both the northern and southern semicircles, and we have a trough over the northwest Caribbean. However, as long as this trough remains just far enough away from our tropical cyclone, it's going to enhance the poleward outflow channel. The upper level environment should remain very conducive for development over the next 48 hours, and there is a 50-50 chance of this storm becoming a hurricane before impacting eastern Cuba. And interest there should be bracing for, if not hurricane force winds, then at the very least some very heavy rainfall, especially in the mountainous terrain where flash flooding could be life-threatening. As we take a more zoomed out approach to the water vapor, you can see the trough anchored out across the southeast Gulf of Mexico, and as long as this trough remains just north of the storm, Sandy should continue to intensify, but the forecast becomes more uncertain as we go into days 4 and 5. We've got some models showing the trough being reinforced by more energy diving out of the southeast United States. If the trough moves too close to the storm, then it could help to enhance the southwest vertical wind shear. However, if the trough and the tropical cyclone phase together, then that could set up an entirely different type of scenario and allow for the storm to become a little bit more in the way of a hybrid or subtropical feature as it rides the east coast and continues to intensify. This is the latest 18Z run of the GFS model, which came out late this afternoon, and this continues to be the most likely solution. As we see over the next 48 to 72 and even 96 hours, the storm continues to intensify as it starts to move more toward the north, toward Kingston, Jamaica, and eastern Cuba. This is something that pretty much all of the models are in agreement on, but as we go deeper into the forecast period beyond day 4, which is around the time that the storm is forecast to be over the northern Bahamas, the GFS model is showing just enough of a weakness out across the central Atlantic, and also it's a little slower with the troughing coming out of the Midwest United States. And as long as this trough remains back toward the west, it's going to have less of a chance to phase with that trough, and instead it just quickly moves out toward the northeast in fairly close proximity toward Bermuda, and then it continues to move east without impacting any other land areas. However, the alternative option is still on the table thanks to a lot of persistence from the European and Canadian model solutions. This is the 12Z run of the ECMWF. As we work our way into day 4, Tropical Storm Sandy is forecast to intensify into at least a minimal hurricane, and as we go into day 5 and day 6, the troughing out across the Midwest is moving into the Ohio Valley already, and the orientation of this trough in this particular model run is more conducive to a full-out phase between the tropical cyclone and the non-tropical trough over much of the eastern United States. As we go into day 8 and day 9, this is setting up to be one of the most devastating autumn storms in East Coast history, especially for interest from Long Island northward throughout all of New England. So although this is not the most likely scenario, this is still something that we definitely cannot ignore, and that is the reason why we have to monitor Sandy very closely all across the U.S. East Coast. Also, just for good measure, this is a look at the ECMWF ensemble mean average beginning at day 5, and you see the position of the tropical cyclone near the northern Bahamas, the trough out across the Midwest. We have temporary ridging out across New England. However, as we go into day 6, and especially day 7, that ridging goes away, and the tropical cyclone is fully phasing with the trough, and this is the scenario that needs to be watched. So in summary, the main focus over the next 48 to 72 hours will be the maximum intensity of Sandy before it arrives across Jamaica and eastern Cuba, and thereafter the intensity and track forecast beyond days 4 and 5 may still be somewhat uncertain until the time the storm arrives in the Bahamas, because remember, initially, at least in the short term, the models are all in fairly good agreement with the storm making that track toward the north, but thereafter that's when the main uncertainty arises, and so therefore it may take a couple more days for the models to sort things out. But we're going to keep close tabs on everything for you here at 28storms.com and the Hurricane Tracker app. Stay tuned for more updates.